Jake Mitchell wiped the sweat from his forehead as he hammered the last nail into the fence post. The summer sun beat down mercilessly on his small ranch in Montana, and the work never seemed to end. 32, he had been running the circle M Ranch alone for 3 years since his father passed away. The loneliness was becoming harder to bear with each passing day. The ranch wasn't huge, but it was enough to keep one man busy from sunrise to sunset. Jake had 200 head of cattle, a small herd of horses, and endless chores that seemed to multiply overnight. His nearest neighbor lived 15 miles away, and the small town of Cedar Creek was a 20-minute ride on horseback. Most days, the only company he had was his faithful dog, Rex, and the occasional visit from old Doc Peterson when he needed supplies. Jake had been thinking about hiring help for months. The work was getting too much for one person, and he found himself falling behind on important tasks. The cattle needed better care, the barn roof had several leaks, and the vegetable garden his mother once tended had become overrun with weeds. He missed having someone to talk to during the long evenings, someone to share a meal with, someone who understood the satisfaction of a hard day's work. After much consideration, Jake decided to post a notice in town. He rode into Cedar Creek. On a Tuesday morning, his horse's hooves kicking up dust on the dry road, the town was small but bustling, with a general store, saloon, church, and a few other essential businesses. Jake tied his horse to the hitching post outside Murphy's General Store and walked inside. Murphy was a friendly Irishman who had been running the store for 20 years. He knew everyone in town and all the gossip that came with small-town life. "Morning, Jake," Murphy called out from behind the counter. "What brings you to town today?" "Need to post a notice," Jake replied, pulling out a piece of paper he had written the night before. "Looking for a farmhand? Someone who's not afraid of hard work and can handle cattle?" Murphy nodded knowingly. "About time you got some help out there. That ranch is too much for one man." He took the notice and tacked it to the board near the front door where everyone could see it. "What kind of pay you offering?" "Room, board, and $30 a month," Jake said. "Fair wages for honest work," the notice read. "Wanted experienced farmhand for cattle ranch. Must be hardworking, reliable, and able to work independently. Room and board provided plus monthly wages. Apply in person at Circle M Ranch, 15 miles west of Cedar Creek. Ask for Jake Mitchell." Jake spent the rest of the morning buying supplies, coffee, flour, bacon, and other necessities. He chatted with a few townspeople who wished him luck finding good help. Everyone knew how hard it was to find reliable workers willing to live on a remote ranch. For 2 weeks, Jake waited. A few men came by, but none seemed right for the job. One was too old and could barely lift a saddle. Another was clearly more interested in drinking than working. A third seemed honest enough, but wanted to bring his wife and 3 children, which would have been too much for Jake's small bussus. Jake was beginning to think would never find the right person when he saw a figure walking slowly up the long dirt road to his ranch. It was late afternoon, and the sun was starting to set behind the mountains. At first he thought it might be another drifter, looking for a meal and a place to sleep for the night. Jake was known for his kindness to travelers, often sharing his table with strangers passing through. As the figure got closer, Jake realized it was a young woman. She was small and thin, wearing a faded blue dress that had seen better days. Her brown hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she carried a small bundle of belongings. What struck Jake most was that she had no shoes on her feet, which were dusty and cut from walking on rough ground. Jake stepped down from his porch, Rex following close behind. The woman stopped a few yards away, looking uncertain but determined. She couldn't have been more than 25, with pretty green eyes and a face that showed both exhaustion and hope. "Evening, miss," Jake said, tipping his hat politely. "Can I help you with something?" The young woman straightened her shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. "I'm here about the farmhand job," she said in a clear, steady voice. "I saw your notice in town." Jake was so surprised he almost forgot to respond. "You're here about the job, but you're a woman? I can work as hard as any man," she replied firmly. "I grew up on a farm. I can milk cows, tend horses, mend fences, and do whatever needs doing. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I won't cause you any trouble." Jake looked down at her bare feet, then back at her determined face. "Where did you come from? How did you get here?" I walked from Cedar Creek, she said simply. I've been traveling for weeks, looking for work. I have experience with cattle and farming. I can cook, clean, and handle myself around animals. All I need is a chance to prove myself. There was something about her quiet confidence that impressed Jake. Despite her worn appearance and obvious hardship, she stood tall and spoke with dignity. Rex, who was usually suspicious of strangers, walked over and sat calmly beside her, which Jake took as a good sign. "What's your name?" Jake asked. "Alina Rodriguez," she replied. "I know it's unusual for a woman to apply for this kind of work, but I'm desperate for a job, and I promise you won't regret giving me a chance." Jake studied her face in the fading light. There was something honest and trustworthy about her, something that told him she was exactly what she claimed to be, a hard worker in need of an opportunity. His practical side told him to send her on her way, but his heart told him something different. "Well, Alina Rodriguez," he said finally, "I suppose we should get you some supper and a place to rest tonight. Tomorrow we'll see what you can do." Relief flooded Elena's face, and for the first time since she arrived, she smiled. It was a beautiful smile that lit up her entire face and made Jake's heart skip a beat. He had no idea that this barefoot stranger would change his life forever. Alina woke before dawn, as she had every day since leaving her hometown 3 months ago. The small room above the barn was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a wooden chair. Jake had apologized for the humble accommodations, but to Alina, it felt like luxury after weeks of sleeping under the stars and in abandoned buildings. She dressed quietly in the same blue dress, wishing she had something more suitable for ranch work. Her feet were still tender from the long walk, but she had endured worse. Alina had learned to be grateful for small mercies, and having a roof over her head was more than she had dared hope for when she started walking toward Cedar Creek. The sun was just beginning to peek over the mountains when Alina made her way to the main house. She could see smoke rising from the chimney and smell coffee brewing. Jake was already up, as she had expected. Ranch work started early, and she was determined to prove she belonged here. She knocked softly on the back door. "Come in," Jake called from inside. Alina entered to find him standing at the stove, cooking bacon and eggs. The kitchen was tidy, but clearly the domain of a man living alone. Dishes were washed and put away, but there was no woman's touch in the decorating or arrangement. "Morning," Jake said, turning to look at her. "Hope you slept well. I made extra breakfast, figuring you'd be hungry after yesterday." "Thank you," Alina replied. "You didn't have to do that. I can cook for myself." "Today you're my guest," Jake said with a smile. "Tomorrow we'll see about work arrangements if things go well." They ate breakfast together as the sun climbed higher. In the sky, Jake explained the layout of the ranch, the daily routines, and what needed to be done. Alina listened carefully, asking questions that showed she understood cattle and farm work. Her knowledge impressed Jake more than he let on. After breakfast, Jake led Alina outside to begin her trial day. "We'll start with the horses," he said, walking toward the corral where 6 horses stood waiting. "They need to be fed, watered, and groomed. Then we'll check on the cattle." Alina approached the horses with confidence, speaking softly to them in both English and Spanish. The animals responded well to her gentle voice and steady hands. She examined each horse carefully, checking their legs, hooves, and general condition. When she found a small cut on one mare's foreleg, she cleaned it properly and applied salve from the barn's medicine kit. "You know horses," Jake observed, impressed by her thorough care. "My father raised horses before he died," Alina explained. "He taught me that a good horse is worth more than gold, but only if you treat them right." They spent the morning working together, Alina proving herself at every task. She repaired a broken gate latch, helped move cattle from one pasture to another, and identified a sick calf that needed attention. Her barefoot state didn't slow her down, though Jake noticed she favored her left foot slightly. At noon, they returned to the house for lunch. Alina insisted on cooking, and Jake was amazed by her skill. She made a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and vegetables from his neglected garden, but it tasted better than anything he had eaten in months. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Jake asked, savoring every bite. "My mother," Alina said quietly. She believed a woman should be able to feed her family well, no matter how little she had to work with. After lunch, Alina surprised Jake by tackling the weedy garden without being asked. She worked steadily under the hot sun, pulling weeds and identifying which vegetables could still be saved. Jake watched from the barn as she moved through the rows with purpose and skill. As the afternoon wore on, Jake found himself studying Alina more than the work they were doing. Despite her worn dress and bare feet, there was a dignity about her that impressed him. She never complained, never asked for special treatment, and never shirked from any task. More than that, she seemed genuinely happy to be working, as if physical labor was a pleasure rather than a burden. When the sun began to set, they finished the day's work and returned to the house. Alina had proven herself beyond Jake's expectations. She was knowledgeable, hardworking, and pleasant to be around. For the first time in years, Jake had enjoyed having someone to talk to while working. "Well," Jake said, as they sat on the front porch watching the stars appear, "I think we should discuss terms." Alina looked at him hopefully. "Does that mean you'll hire me?" "It means you've got the job if you want it," Jake replied. "Room, board, and $30 a month, just like the notice said. We'll have the room above the barn, and we'll eat meals together in the main house. Accept." Alina said immediately, "Thank you for giving me a chance." "There's one condition," Jake added. "Tomorrow, we're riding into town to get you some proper work, clothes, and boots. Can't work barefoot forever, and that dress won't last a week doing ranch work." Alina's face flushed red. "I don't have money for new clothes. It's part of the job," Jake said firmly. "Can't have my hired hand looking like a drifter. It's bad for the ranch's reputation." That night, Alina lay in her narrow bed, thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. 3 months ago, she had been living in a small town in New Mexico with her aunt and uncle, working as a seamstress for barely enough money to survive. When her uncle lost his job and they could no longer afford to keep her, she had set out. On her own, with nothing but hope and determination, the journey had been harder than she expected. She had walked hundreds of miles, working odd jobs when she could find them, sleeping rough when she couldn't afford a room. Her shoes had worn out weeks ago, and she had been forced to abandon them when they became more hindrance than help. But now, lying in a real bed with the promise of steady work and fair wages, Alina felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Jake Mitchell seemed like a good man, honest and fair. The ranch was beautiful. The work was exactly what she knew how to do. Alina had one secret she hadn't shared with Jake, something that had driven her to leave New Mexico and seek a new life. Her uncle hadn't just lost his job, he had also accumulated gambling debts to dangerous men. When they came looking for money the family didn't have, it made it clear that Alina could pay her uncle's debts in other ways. She had left in the middle of the night, taking only what she could carry, determined to make a new life, far from the threats and violence that had driven her from her home. Finding work on Jake's ranch felt like a miracle, a chance to start over with dignity and safety. As Alina drifted off to sleep, she whispered a prayer of gratitude. She had found not just work, but possibly a place where she could belong. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time in months, she faced the future without fear. 3 weeks had passed since Alina arrived at the Circle M Ranch, and Jake found himself looking forward to each new day in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Alina had settled into the rhythm of ranch life as if she had been born to it. Every morning, she was up before dawn, tending to the horses and starting breakfast. Every evening, she worked until the last task was finished, never complaining about long hours or difficult conditions. The trip to town for work clothes had been enlightening for both of them. Alina had been overwhelmed by Jake's generosity when he purchased not just boots and work pants, but also 2 new dresses, undergarments, and a warm coat for the coming winter. She had tried to protest the expense, but Jake insisted it was a necessary investment in his ranch hand. The townspeople had stared openly at the unlikely pair, the gruff rancher, and the mysterious young woman with the slight Spanish accent. Ignored the whispers and curious glances, but Alina seemed uncomfortable with the attention. She stayed close to him during their errands and spoke only when necessary. Now, Alina wore sturdy boots and practical clothes that allowed her to work without worry. She had braided her long hair into a neat plait that stayed out of her way during the day. The transformation was remarkable not just in her appearance, but in her confidence. She moved with purpose and spoke her mind about ranch matters with increasing frequency. Jake discovered that Alina had opinions about everything from cattle breeding to crop rotation. And most of her ideas were excellent. She suggested moving the cattle to different pastures earlier than he had planned, and the animals thrived on the fresh grass. She recommended planting winter wheat in a field that had been sitting unused, and Jake realized it was exactly what the soil needed. More than her work skills, Jake appreciated Elena's company. After years of eating meals alone and having only his dog for conversation, sharing stories and discussing ranch business with someone who truly understood was a luxury he hadn't realized he missed. Alina was well-read despite her humble background. She had a quick wit that often made him laugh. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a particularly successful day moving cattle, Jake asked Alina about her past. "You never talk about where you came from," he said gently. "I know it's none of my business, but I'm curious about how a young woman learned so much about ranching." Alina was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. "My father had a small ranch in New Mexico," she finally said. "Nothing like this, just a few dozen cattle and some horses. But he taught me everything he knew before he died." "What happened to the ranch?" Jake asked. "We lost it," Alina said simply. "My mother got sick, and the medical bills were more than we could handle. After she died, I went to live with my aunt and uncle in town. That's where I learned to sew and cook for other people." Jake sensed there was more to the story, but he didn't push. Everyone had a right to their private sorrows, and Alina would share more when she was ready. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Jake was repairing the barn roof when he saw two men riding up the long drive to the ranch house. They were strangers, well-dressed, but with an air of menace that immediately put him on alert. Alina was in the vegetable garden. Jake noticed her freeze when she saw the riders. The men dismounted near the house, and Jake climbed down from the roof to meet them. As he approached, he saw Alina backing slowly toward the barn, her face pale with fear. "Afternoon," Jake said calmly, but his hand rested on the gun at his hip. "Something I can help you gentlemen with?" The older of the two men smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're looking for a young lady named Elena Rodriguez. Heard she might be working around these parts." Jake glanced toward the garden, but Alina had disappeared. "Don't know anyone by that name," he lied smoothly. "What's your business with this woman?" "Family matter," the younger man said. "Her uncle owes us money, and she ran off before settling the debt. We just want to have a conversation with her." Jake's jaw tightened. These men were obviously trouble. Their interest in Alina explained her mysterious arrival and reluctance to discuss her past. "Like I said, don't know anyone by that name. Might want to try the next ranch over, about 30 miles east." The older man studied Jake carefully. "You sure about that? It's a pretty little thing about this tall, dark hair, green eyes." "Goes by Alina." "Sometimes Lena," I'm sure Jake said firmly. "Now, unless you've got other business here, I'd appreciate if you moved along. I've got work to do." The two men exchanged glances, and Jake could see them weighing their options. Finally, the older man shrugged. "Well, if you see her, tell her Carlos Mendoza is looking for her. She'll know what it means." They mounted their horses and rode away, but Jake noticed they took their time, looking carefully at the ranch buildings and surroundings. He waited until they were completely out of sight before calling out, "Alina, they're gone." Alina emerged from behind the barn. Shaking visibly, Jake walked over to her, concerned by her obvious terror. "Who were those men?" he asked gently. "Carlos Mendoza and his partner," Elena whispered. "They work for the man my uncle owed money to. They've been following me." "What kind of debt are we talking about?" Jake asked. Elena looked down at her hands. "My uncle gambled away money that wasn't his. When he couldn't pay, they said his family would have to make up the difference. They wanted me to work in one of their establishments to pay off the debt." Jake felt a cold anger building in his chest. "What kind of establishment?" "The kind where young women don't have a choice about what they do," Elena said quietly. Jake understood immediately, and his anger flared into rage. These men were hunting Alina like an animal, intending to force her into a life of degradation and abuse. The thought of anyone harming this brave, hard-working woman made his blood boil. "They won't take you," Jake said firmly. "Won't let them." Alina looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "You don't understand. These are dangerous men. They won't just go away because you told them to, and now they know I'm here. Then we'll be ready for them," Jake replied. "This is my land and you're under my protection. They want to take you? They'll have to go through me first." Alina shook her head. "I can't ask you to risk your life for me. Maybe I should just leave. Go somewhere else." "Running didn't work the first time," Jake pointed out. "And besides, you're not just asking me to help. I'm volunteering. You belong here now, Alina. This is your home, and nobody's taking you away from it." The sincerity in his voice brought fresh tears to Elena's eyes, but these were tears of gratitude rather than fear. In all her life, no one had ever offered to protect her without expecting something in return. Jake's fierce loyalty was both surprising and deeply moving. "Thank you," she whispered. "But what if they come back with more men?" "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," Jake said. "For now, we need to be prepared." "Can you shoot?" Alina nodded. "My father taught me." "Good. We'll practice tomorrow, and I'll teach you about the hiding places on this ranch. If trouble comes, you'll know where to go." That night, Alina lay awake thinking about Jake's unwavering support. She had expected him to send her away when he learned about her dangerous past. Instead, he had offered protection without hesitation, as if her safety was more important than his own. For the first time since leaving New Mexico, Alina began to believe she might have found not just work, but a true home. The days following the visit from Carlos Mendoza and his partner were tense but productive. Jake had turned their preparation for potential trouble into an opportunity to teach Alina advanced ranch skills she hadn't learned from her father. They practiced shooting together each morning, and Alina proved to be an excellent marksman with both rifle and pistol. "Your father taught you well, Jake," observed as Alina hit the center of a target from 50 yards away. "That's better shooting than most men I know." He said a person living on a ranch needed to be able to protect the livestock and themselves. Alina replied, reloading the rifle with smooth efficiency. "He made me practice until I could hit what I aimed at even in poor light." Jake showed Alina every hiding place on the ranch, caves in the nearby hills, dense thickets along the creek, and even a hidden room behind the root cellar that his father had built during Indian troubles years earlier. They'd established signals and escape routes, turning the ranch into a fortress that could protect Alina if needed. But as the weeks passed without another visit from Mendoza, Jake and Alina began to relax into a comfortable partnership that went far beyond employer and hired hand. They worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs and sharing the satisfaction of jobs well done. Alina had transformed the neglected garden into a productive source of fresh vegetables, and she had organized the house with a woman's touch that Jake found surprisingly pleasant, more than the practical improvements. Jake treasured the companionship Alina provided. She was intelligent and well-spoken, with a dry sense of humor that emerged once she felt secure. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, discussing everything from politics to philosophy. And Jake discovered that Alina had read more books than anyone he knew, despite her humble background. "How did you get so educated?" he asked one evening as they discussed a newspaper article about the railroad expansion. "My mother was a teacher before she married my father," Alina explained. "She believed knowledge was the one thing no one could take away from you, so she made sure I learned everything she could teach me. When there were no more books in our town, she ordered them from Santa Fe and Albuquerque." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Alina said softly. "She would have liked you, I think. She always said a man's character showed in how he treated people who couldn't do anything for him in return." Jake felt a warmth spread through his chest at the compliment. "What about you? What do you think of me?" Alina looked at him in the soft lamplight, and Jake saw something in her eyes that made his heart race. "I think you're the most honorable man I've ever known," she said quietly. "I think you saved my life, and I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, surprising them both with their honesty. Jake had been fighting his growing feelings for Alina for weeks, telling himself it wouldn't be proper to pursue a woman who worked for him and depended on him for protection. But hearing her confession made his own feelings impossible to deny. "Alina," he said softly, reaching for her hand. "I've been falling in love with you since the day you walked up that road with no shoes on your feet and enough courage to ask. For a man's job." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Really? Even though I'm not what you expected when you posted that notice?" "You're everything I never dared hope for," Jake replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "You're beautiful, intelligent, hardworking, and braver than most men I know. I can't imagine this ranch without you anymore." They moved closer together on the porch swing, and Jake gently cupped Elena's face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" "Asked I was hoping you would," Elena whispered. Their first kiss was tender and sweet. It was filled with weeks of suppressed longing and the promise of a future together. When they finally parted, both were breathless and smiling. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Now I ask you properly," Jake said, sliding off the porch swing to kneel before her. "Elena Rodriguez, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner in everything?" "Yes," Elena said without hesitation. "Yes, Jake Mitchell, I will marry you." "I?" They held each other close as the stars appeared overhead, both marveling at how dramatically their lives had changed in just 2 months. As Jake had found not just a hired hand, but a life partner who shared his dreams and values. Elena had found not just safety and employment, but true love and a place where she belonged. The next morning brought a harsh Menace was still threatened. Jake was in the barn when he heard horses approaching. He looked out to see Carlos Mendoza and 3 other men riding toward the house. This time, they were clearly prepared for trouble. All armed and wearing grim expressions, Jake grabbed his rifle and ran toward the house. Shouting a warning to Elena, she was hanging laundry behind the house, and she immediately dropped the clothes and ran for the hiding place they had prepared behind the root cellar. "Mitchell," Mendoza called out as Jake stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "We know the girl is here. We've been watching. Time to stop playing games." "There's no girl here," Jake said calmly, "and you're trespassing on my land. Suggest you leave before there's trouble." "The trouble's already started," Mendoza replied, signaling to his men. They spread out, surrounding the house. "We followed her here, and we're not leaving without her. She belongs to us now. No woman belongs to you," Jake said, his voice hard as steel. "And you're not taking anyone from my ranch." "Then you'll die protecting her," Mendoza said, reaching for his gun. Jake was faster. His first shot took Mendoza out of the saddle before the man could draw his weapon. The other 3 men opened fire, and bullets splintered the wood around Jake as he dove for cover behind a porch post. The gunfight was brief but intense. Jake's knowledge of his own ranch gave him an advantage, and his superior marksmanship proved decisive. When the shooting stopped, all 4 men lay dead in his front yard. Elena emerged from hiding to find Jake sitting on the porch steps, bleeding from a graze on his arm but otherwise unharmed. She ran to him, tears streaming down her face. "Are you hurt badly?" she asked, examining his wound. "Just a scratch," Jake assured her. "It's over, Elena. They can't hurt you anymore." Elena bandaged Jake's arm with strips torn from her petticoat, her hands shaking with reaction. "What if there are more of them?" "Then we'll deal with them too," Jake said firmly. "But I don't think there will be. Men like Mendoza work for money, not loyalty. With him dead, the others will find easier prey." They buried the 4 men on a hill behind the ranch, and Jake rode to town to report the incident to the sheriff. The law was on their side. They had been defending their home against armed men who had threatened violence. That evening, sat together on the porch where they had first confessed their love, Elena marveled at how safe she felt in Jake's arms. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I love you too," Jake replied, holding her close. "And tomorrow we're riding to town to see the preacher. I want you to be my wife as soon as possible." Elena smiled, finally able to believe in a future filled with happiness and security. She had walked barefoot into Jake's life seeking only work, but she had found her heart's true home. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning in the small church in Cedar Creek. Elena wore a simple but beautiful white dress that Murphy's wife had helped her sew, and Jake stood proudly beside her in his best suit. The entire town had turned out for the ceremony, curious about the mysterious young woman who had captured their bachelor rancher's heart. Reverend Williams performed the service with warmth and dignity, speaking about the sacred bond of marriage and the importance of supporting each other through all of life's challenges. When Jake and Alina exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other for better or worse, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Reverend Williams announced with a smile. Jake lifted Alina's veil and kissed her tenderly, sealing their union before God and the community. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers, welcoming Alina officially into their close-knit town. The celebration continued at Murphy's General Store, where the townspeople had prepared a wedding feast. There was roasted beef, fresh bread, apple pies, and even a small wedding cake decorated with wildflowers. Alina was overwhelmed by the kindness of these people who had been strangers just months before. "Welcome to the family, my dear," said Mrs. Peterson, the doctor's wife. "Jake's a good man, and we're so happy he found someone to share his life with." "Thank you," Alina replied, touched by the genuine warmth in the older woman's voice. "Everyone has been so kind to me. You've earned their respect," Jake said, putting his arm around his new wife. "They can see what kind of person you are by how hard you work and how you carry yourself." As the afternoon wore on, Alina found herself surrounded by the women of the town, all eager to share advice about marriage and ranch life. She learned about the upcoming harvest festival, the Christmas pageant, and the various social activities that marked the seasons in Cedar Creek. For the first time in her adult life, Alina felt like she belonged to a real community. Jake spent his time receiving congratulations from the men and discussing ranch business. Several neighbors offered to help with the fall roundup, and old Murphy presented him with a bottle of fine whiskey as a wedding gift. "Knew you'd find the right woman eventually," Murphy said with a grin, "though I have to admit none of us expected her to show up barefoot asking for a job." "Best decision I ever made was hiring her," Jake replied, watching Alina laugh with a group of women across the room. "She's made everything better. The ranch, my life, everything." As the sun began to set, Jake and Alina prepared to return to their ranch. They rode home in their small wagon, Alina's wedding dress carefully protected by a blanket, both glowing with happiness and contentment. "Double quotes, Mrs. Mitchell," Jake said, testing out her new name. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Alina replied, snuggling closer to her husband. "I never imagined I could be this happy." The ranch looked different to Alina as they approached their home. It was no longer just a place where she worked and slept. It was truly hers now, a place where she and Jake would build their life together. The little room above the barn had been prepared as a guest room, and Alina's belongings had been moved into the main house to share Jake's bedroom that night. As they sat together on their porch as husband and wife, Alina marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't posted that notice?" she asked. "I try not to think about it," Jake replied, "but I suspect we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be." The first year of their marriage was filled with challenges and rewards in equal measure. Alina threw herself into making improvements to the ranch, using her business sense to find new markets for their cattle and suggesting innovations that increased their profits. She started a vegetable garden that produced enough surplus to sell in town, and she raised chickens that provided both eggs and additional income. Jake marveled at his wife's energy and intelligence. Alina had ideas about everything from breeding programs to crop rotation, and most of her suggestions proved profitable. She kept meticulous records of expenses and income, helping Jake understand exactly how well the ranch was performing. But Alina's greatest contribution was the warmth and companionship she brought to Jake's previously solitary life. House that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter and conversation. Alina filled every room with her presence, hanging curtains she had sewn herself, arranging wildflowers in mason jars, and cooking meals that turned their kitchen into the heart of their home. Winter brought new challenges, as heavy snows isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. But instead of the lonely, difficult season Jake had endured in previous years, this winter was filled with cozy evenings by the fire, long conversations about their dreams and plans, and the deep contentment that comes from sharing life's burdens and joys with someone who truly understands. Alina proved herself during a particularly harsh blizzard in February. Jake had been checking on the cattle when he was thrown from his horse and broke his leg. He managed to crawl to the barn, but couldn't make it back to the house. Alina found him hours later, nearly frozen, and single-handedly got him inside and cared for his injury. For 3 weeks, while Jake's leg healed, Alina ran the entire ranch by herself. She fed the animals, broke ice on the water troughs, and even delivered a calf during a midnight snowstorm. When Doc Peterson finally made it through the drifts to check on Jake's leg, he was amazed by Alina's competence. "That wife of yours is worth her weight in gold," he told Jake. "I've seen grown men panic over less than what she handled alone." "I know," Jake replied, watching Alina efficiently organize the medicine cabinet. "I'm the luckiest man in Montana." Spring brought wonderful news. Alina was expecting their first child. Jake was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a father, and Alina glowed with happiness despite the morning sickness that kept her queasy for several weeks. "Hope it's a boy who looks like you," Alina said one evening as they sat planning improvements to the house. "Hope it's a girl who looks like you," Jake countered. "Either way, our child will be loved and wanted." They spent the summer preparing for the baby, converting a spare room into a nursery, and making plans for the future. Alina continued working around the ranch until her pregnancy made heavy labor impossible, then focused on lighter tasks like bookkeeping and planning. In August, Jake hired 2 seasonal hands to help with the fall roundup. One was a young man named Danny, who reminded them both of Jake at that age, hardworking, honest, and eager to learn. The other was an older cowboy named Pete, who had worked ranches all over the territory. "You've got yourself a fine operation," here Pete told Jake as they watched Alina directing the organization of supplies for the roundup. "And that wife of yours has a good head for business. Most ranches this size don't run near as smooth as yours." Jake swelled with pride at the compliment. In just over a year, Alina had transformed not just his ranch, but his entire life. She had brought order to chaos, profit to struggle, and love to loneliness. The roundup was successful, with their cattle bringing top prices at market. Alina's careful record-keeping showed that they had increased their profits by 30% over the previous year. Despite hiring additional help, "We can afford to expand," Alina told Jake as they reviewed the books. "Maybe by the Henderson place when it comes up for sale next spring." "Are you sure you want a bigger operation with a baby coming?" Jake asked. "I want our child to inherit something substantial," Alina replied. "I want to build a legacy together, something that will last for generations." As autumn painted the mountains in brilliant colors, Alina's pregnancy progressed smoothly. She remained active and involved. In ranch operations, though, Jake insisted on handling all the heavy work himself. The townspeople had fully accepted her as one of their own, and several of the women had offered to help when the baby arrived. One evening in late October, as they celebrated their first wedding anniversary, Jake reflected on the miraculous changes in his life. A year ago, he had been a lonely bachelor struggling to manage his ranch alone. Now he was a happily married man with a thriving business and a child on the way. "What are you thinking about?" Alina asked, noticing his contemplative mood. "I'm thinking about how you walked into my life and changed everything," Jake replied. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am that you answered that notice in Murphy's store." "I'm grateful too," Alina said, taking his hand and placing it on her rounded belly. "I'm grateful you saw past my bare feet and worn dress to the person I really was." "I love you, Alina Mitchell," Jake said, kissing her softly. "I love you too, Jake Mitchell," Alina replied. "And I always will." They sat together watching the sunset over their thriving ranch. Both knew that their greatest adventures still lay ahead. Alina went into labor on a snowy December morning, 3 weeks before Christmas. Jake had been chopping wood when he heard her call his name from the house, her voice tight with pain and excitement. He dropped his axe and ran inside to find Alina, gripping the kitchen table, her face flushed but determined. "It's time," she said simply. "The baby is coming." Jake's carefully planned preparations flew out of his mind in a moment of pure panic. "Now, but Doc Peterson said you had another week. At least." "Babies don't follow schedules," Alina replied with a small smile, even as another contraction made her gasp. You need to ride to town and get Mrs. Henderson. She's delivered dozens of babies. I can't leave you alone, Jake protested. You have two, Elena said firmly. This baby isn't going to wait, and I need help. Jake saddled his fastest horse and rode to town through the falling snow, his heart pounding with fear and excitement. He found Mrs. Henderson at the church, decorating for the Christmas service, and explained the situation breathlessly. Babies always come at the most inconvenient times, Mrs. Henderson said calmly, gathering her supplies. Don't worry, Jake. Alina is strong and healthy. Everything will be fine. They returned to the ranch to find Alina pacing in the bedroom, Rex sitting loyally beside her. The loyal dog seemed to understand that something important was happening and refused to leave Elena's side. How long between pains? Mrs. Henderson asked professionally, taking charge of the situation. About 5 minutes, Alina replied, gripping Jake's hand as another contraction began. They're getting stronger. Mrs. Henderson sent Jake to boil water and gather clean towels, giving him tasks to keep him busy while she examined Alina. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity, with Alina laboring bravely while Jake paced nervously between the kitchen and bedroom. I can see the head, Mrs. Henderson announced excitedly. One more push, Alina. Your baby is almost here. Alina bore down with all her strength, and suddenly the room filled with the sound of a baby's cry. Jake rushed to Elena's side as Mrs. Henderson lifted their child, a perfect little boy with a full head of dark hair and strong lungs. You have a son, Mrs. Henderson said, placing the baby in Elena's arms. He's beautiful and healthy. Jake stared in amazement at his son, overwhelmed by emotions he had never experienced before. The tiny fingers and toes, the perfect little face, the way the baby calmed when Alina spoke to him, it all seemed like a miracle. Hello, little one, Alina whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face. I'm your mama, and this is your papa. He's perfect, Jake said softly, gently touching the baby's tiny hand, just like his mother. They named him David, after Jake's father, and the entire town celebrated his arrival. Murphy closed the store early to visit the new family, bringing gifts and congratulations. Doc Peterson pronounced the baby healthy and strong and predicted he would grow up to be a fine rancher like his father. The first months of David's life were filled with wonder and adjustment. Alina proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving, even during the sleepless nights when David was fussy. Jake marveled at how easily she balanced caring for the baby with managing household duties and ranch business. You make it look so easy, Jake observed one morning, watching Alina efficiently feed David while reviewing cattle records. Nothing worth doing is easy, Alina replied. But when you love what you're doing, the work becomes a joy. Spring brought new opportunities and challenges. The Henderson Ranch came up for sale as Alina had predicted, and they were able to purchase it at a fair price. The additional land doubled the size of their operation, but it also meant more work and responsibility. Jake hired Danny as a permanent hand, giving the young man a chance to learn ranch management while earning steady wages. Alina proved invaluable in training new workers, her patient instruction and clear expectations, helping them understand not just how to do their jobs, but why each task mattered to the ranch's success. She's got a gift for teaching, Danny told Jake one evening. Makes everything make sense in a way nobody ever explained to me before. As David grew from an infant into a toddler, he became the center of attention for the entire community. He was a bright, curious child who loved animals and showed early signs of inheriting both his parents' intelligence and determination. Lena taught him Spanish and English, while Jake showed him how to care for horses and cattle. He's going to be a rancher, Jake predicted, watching 18-month-old David toddle fearlessly among the gentle horses in the corral. He'll be whatever he wants to be, Alina replied. But I hope he loves this land as much as we do. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. Alina's business acumen and Jake's practical experience proved to be a perfect combination, and their reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock spread throughout the territory. They were able to pay off their debts ahead of schedule and even start a small savings account for David's future education. On their third wedding anniversary, Jake surprised Alina with a gift he had been planning for months, a beautiful locket containing tiny photographs of their family. Alina was so moved by the thoughtful present that she cried with happiness. "I have something for you too," Alina said, smiling mysteriously. "Another addition to our family?" Jake looked confused for a moment before understanding dawned on his face. "Another baby? Due in the spring," Alina confirmed. "David is going to be a big brother." Her second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born on a warm May morning when the wildflowers were blooming across the ranch. She was smaller than David had been, but equally healthy, with Elena's green eyes and a sweet temperament that charmed everyone who met her. Jake found fatherhood even more rewarding the second time, having learned from experience how to balance work responsibilities with family time. He often carried Rose in a sling while doing light ranch work, and she seemed to enjoy the motion and activity. Alina recovered quickly from Rose's birth and returned to her active role in ranch management, though she now had to coordinate her work schedule around caring for two young children. The townswomen often marveled at her energy and organization, wondering how she managed to be such a devoted mother while also helping run a successful business. "She's like 3 women in one," Mrs. Peterson observed. "Mother, rancher, and businesswoman, and she excels at all of them." As Jake and Elena's 5th wedding anniversary approached, they reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them together and carried them to this point of happiness and prosperity. The barefoot young woman who had walked up their road, seeking work, had become the foundation of everything good in Jake's life. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Lena asked one evening as they watched their children play in the yard while the sun set behind the mountains. "What old life?" Jake replied, pulling her close. "My real life started the day you arrived. Everything before that was just waiting." Alina smiled and leaned into her husband's embrace, watching David teach little Rose how to pet their old dog, Rex, who tolerated the children's attention with patient dignity. The ranch spread around them in all directions, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to what two people could accomplish when they worked together with love and determination. "I love you, Jake Mitchell," Alina said softly. Alina said softly. "Alina?" Mitchell, Jake replied, "Forever and always." As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, Jake and Alina sat together on the porch where they had first confessed their love, surrounded by everything they had built together. The lonely rancher and the desperate young woman with no shoes had found in each other not just love, but a partnership that had created something beautiful and lasting. Their love story had become a legend in Cedar Creek, proof that sometimes the most unexpected arrivals bring the greatest blessings. And for Jake and Alina, every day was a new chapter in their ongoing adventure of building a life together on the land they both cherished.